Good morning. Our gospel reading is Mark chapter 6, verses 30 through 34. If you'd like to follow along in your pew Bible, it can be found on page 916. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. The gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
There we go. Yes, 4. There we go. And if we have more, that's okay. All right, so we got these 4 right here. What's going to happen is, you saw a quick flash on the screen. What's going to happen, and all of you can kind of do this. We're going to flash a sentence onto the screen for 10 seconds. And then after that 10 seconds, we're going to go backwards in the slides, please, back to this original one. So we're going to show it for 10 seconds. Those of you standing up, and all of us can do this on our own, but those of you standing up, I need you to count how many of the letter F you see in that sentence on the screen, okay? You're only going to have 10 seconds to do it. So here we go. Let's go. 1, 2, 9, 10. All right. 3, 2. All right, you 4 can be seated. Thank you very much. All right, anybody see anything else? 5, 6, 4. All right, so let's go ahead a slide, and then there we go. Good. There are 6 F's in this sentence. Finished files are the result of years of scientific with of at the end. There we go. So I said I wouldn't embarrass you, but that was up to you. So that's... it's amazing, right? I know it's only 10 seconds, but how certain things elude us is what I think is really interesting about that. Next slide, please. I've told this story before or used this illustration and metaphor, but it'll work for today again. And so this is something I think a lot of us experience, right? So I have a routine. All of us have some sort of routine. You come in after a day of work, and for me, I put my keys and my wallet in the same drawer. Again, I think I've said this before, but I'm using it again. Put it in the same drawer, so in the morning when I need to leave, I can go to that drawer, I have my stuff, and I'm ready to go. It's that simple. And so a lot of us have this experience where we are ready to leave the house in the morning. We grab our keys, we grab our wallet, grab your purse, whatever, shoes, things going. And then all of a sudden, if you have kids or something else that distracts you, oh, my kindergartner forgot to put their shoes on, and you told them 7 times to get their shoes on, but they didn't, so you had to go help, or they forgot a bag, and then you forgot you need to get your backpack or something, so you go back in the house, and then, you have your keys, and you're looking for all of this stuff, and you're going around, and you're trying to figure out all the things that you're forgetting, and then you go to your car, and you go, where are my keys? So you go back in the house because you've lost them. You've set them down somewhere, and so you start looking, and you can't find them. And then, for me, I tell my wife, Brenda, I don't know where my keys are. Can someone please help me find my keys? And so Brenda will come into the house, and we'll all scour the house, and Kirsten will come in, and Ainsley will come in, and we'll all scour the house looking for my keys. And I'll get so frustrated that I'm ready to say things that I probably shouldn't say, and then I'll realize that I've been looking for keys that I put in my pocket already, right? Because we overlook things. Sometimes we don't necessarily see things, and we forget things, and things elude us. All right, we're going to have another reading test on the screen. Next slide, please. Go ahead and read this to yourselves. All right, how many people were not able to read that ultimately? Couple. But everyone, for the most part, ready, able to read it after you kind of got into it? Right, if you weren't able to read it, the phenomenal power of the human mind, according to a research at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word R. The only important thing is that the first and last letter be in the right place. The rest can be a total mess, and you can still read it without problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole. Pretty impressive. I mean, you think about what the leap the human mind is able to make just by putting the first and last letter and to comprehend every bit of that. Of course, this launched me off into one of my infamous, probably spent too much time Googling on work time to figure things out, but I really got into some of the cognitive research behind this. And of course, every major university has some sort of study on this, but I found out, you can go to the next slide, the University of California, San Diego studies this, and specifically, when asked what about the human brain allows that leap to happen, there isn't a single cognitive research branch that has an answer for that. They all say that we don't know because we use computers and people who are very analytical. Those are about the detail leading to an answer, and what we're talking about is something actually quite different, right? There's nothing about the detail. In fact, you almost have to stay away from the detail to understand those words. And so it's really interesting. And this one research said this: we use context to pre-activate the areas of our brains that correspond to what we expect next. I'll read it again. We use context to pre-activate the areas of our brains that correspond to what we expect next. Here's an example. And it's all about context, right? Our brain assumes things and then makes the leap. So I am going to make a sound, and I want you to just, whatever comes to your mind, see if it works. Ding. Right? How'd you know that? Saying the word ding leads to something else. And what researchers found when they watch your brain light up when certain things happen, that even if you don't make that sound, so don't make a noise, ding. Oh, that was cool. First service couldn't do that. They kept tripping up on it. I said, don't make a sound. What's interesting is that when you look at the brain scans, when that happens, the brain lights up in exactly the same way as when you actually say something. You'd think that the use of motor skills, that the brain would light up a little more, but your brain in context lights up exactly the same way because it makes the sound for you in the head. It's fascinating. So the brain makes assumptions. It takes leaps all based on context. We're going to do another one of these little games. So next slide, please. Go ahead and read this one. Is anyone not able to do that one? It's definitely harder. Maybe you don't want to admit to it. That's okay. I'll read it. This message serves to prove how our minds can do amazing things, impressive things. In the beginning, it was hard, but now, on this line, your mind is reading it automatically without even thinking about it. Be proud. Only certain people. See, you don't even need the rest of it to fill in the blanks, right? That's the point of it ending there, is because you get to a certain point of context, you can even fill in not just the word, but the sentences. So this was another study done in Spain, found that reading things like this, that the brain that normally recognizes numbers, that section of your brain that recognizes numbers doesn't even light up with this. So even though it's full of numbers, that section of your brain completely shuts off, and it keeps in the verbal part, the words and the letters, that part of your brain that lights up. And they think, again, it's all conjecture, but they think what happens is that your conscious mind, it basically shuts down your unconscious mind, because your unconscious mind notices all kinds of things. But your conscious mind, because of context, makes leaps and closes out the things that don't fit, that aren't rational, that aren't logical, that don't make any sense, and completely ignores it so that it can create something that does make complete and total sense. And that's how this whole thing supposedly works after all of my online cognitive brain study research that I do. I am now an expert. No, I'm not. But that kind of sets up a point that I want to lift up today with our text. Next slide, please. We are still in the Gospel of Mark, and I've said this every week, but just so you are aware, in our summers, we are this summer just following the lectionary. I often will do sermon series on a topic or a book, but we're following the lectionary. And what the lectionary is, I've said that a few times, but I've assumed that maybe you know what that is. The lectionary is really a set of prescribed readings that many churches use. Fewer and fewer are using it. There are lots of different narratives. There's not one lectionaries. There's not one lectionary. There's a narrative lectionary. There's the common lectionary, which we use, and it's only 20 or 30 years old. There was a completely different lectionary before that. But it's on a 3-year cycle, so that you make sure you get through the bulk of the Bible. Not all of it, but the bulk of it. And so when you're following the lectionary, when I figure out what I'm going to preach on, all I do is open up a book that has today's date on it, and it tells me what passage I'm going to preach on. And that it's as simple as that. And so when I did that this week, I saw what the passage was, and a question popped into mind. Now, I have to tell you this. There's a whole process to preaching that is exactly the same as any public speaking. If you're going to give a keynote address at like a graduation or something, you wouldn't have a lot to go on. You might have an idea that comes to you later, and once you have an idea, you'd probably launch off of that and fill in a really good speech. But it's the same with preaching. It's not like because it's a text, this is what I preach on. It could be anything. And so there are a lot of things that I do to kind of find that spark to go on. But this time, I didn't find it in a Hebrew word or a Greek word. I didn't find it in a miracle story or a parable. I found it when I literally opened up the lectionary. And this is what I saw, and see if any questions come to mind. The lectionary, it's year B, 2015-16, Mark, and what question might come to your mind? What happened? Next slide, please. Yeah, exactly. What happened in verses 35 to 52? What happened between those chunks? Somebody somewhere decided that we're going to read this part and skip everything in between. Now, don't get me wrong, those things are covered in other parts of the lectionary, but what story do you only watch? It's like reading the first page and the last page of a book. Why are we skipping what's in between? And so without reading it, without getting into the text, I already had a question that got me going. Why did we skip something is the question. So in digging into this, what came to my mind is let's read what was skipped, right? Let's see what was skipped. Next slide. And what was skipped, it turned out not to be very important. It wasn't a big deal at all. It was Jesus feeding 5,000 people and Jesus walking on water. Just a couple of obscure stories, no big deal, walking on water, feeding 5,000 people. It's like, this is what was skipped? I couldn't believe that. I mean, you'd think that maybe, but it doesn't. If you go back and even read what's in the lectionary at beginning and end. I mean, there's some stuff there, but to skip those stories, what in the world would possess someone to do exactly that? Why would you skip over things? Why would you miss things? Why would you decide to focus on something that's maybe more important, but something else? So then when I read this, when I got into it and started reading it, I saw other things that people were skipping over. People were missing. People, for whatever reason, consciously or unconsciously or however that works, were skipping over other things. And those people were the disciples. And so this may not necessarily be exactly what these texts mean, but I certainly found it interesting. And here is what was skipped over. We can stay on this slide for a while. In the feeding of 5,000, in verse 35 is where that starts. This is what it says. It says, "By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. And they said to Jesus, 'This is a remote place, and it's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat,'" right? It would be like if we had 5,000 people here, and our director of leadership, our vice president, Will, said, "There's a lot of people here. Send them out to get something to eat before we continue on for our day," right? That would be exactly what it is. And Jesus says, "No, give them something to eat, Will. Give them something to eat." Where's Tammy at, our food coordinator? Exactly. And their response was, "But that would be 2 years' worth of wages." The disciples who are hanging out for a long time, disciples who have seen things that many of us probably have never even dreamed of seeing, couldn't even see the fact that the creator of all things told them just to feed them, and didn't see the fact that this God who they were with might be able to pull it off without wages, without whatever they have in their pocket. They completely skipped over the fact that they were with God. They missed something right in front of their face and skipped right to what makes sense. Well, I don't have enough money in my pocket. Of course that can't happen. forget the fact that they are with God. The second story that was skipped over in this was the story of Jesus walking on water. And in verse 49, it says this: they saw him walking on the lake and thought he was a ghost. And they cried out. What would it sound like for a bunch of guys crying out when they see someone walking on water? Oh, come on. Are you serious? Who did that? No, I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Anyway, here comes a ghost, a grown man screaming because why would you act that way if you're with God? What is impossible when we're with Jesus? What did they skip over? It might be freaky, it might be weird, but to cry out? When you're with the creator of the universe, there should be nothing that should surprise them, but they were crying out in fear. In other words, their consciousness, their linear rational minds couldn't quite see the obvious things that were in front of them. They had to make it into something that they could understand and react accordingly. And I would say that for us as well, that our consciousness, our linear rational minds, we don't see the world as created by God, but we create the world in our comfortable, rational, it all makes sense image. And sometimes we skip over the reality that God can do all things, that through God, all things are possible. I mean, isn't that kind of the point? I don't know about you. I can only speak for me and this little journey that this text took me on. And it was a journey. It's a journey that really took me away from the prescribed text into what is it that we skip over in our lives. How much do we skip over the reality of God in this creation, of God in this world? How much do we simply want things to make sense, and often we fill in the blanks when it doesn't make sense? How many of us rely on basic Newtonian physics every morning and explain the sun rising by that? The fact that the earth spins, the moon goes around the sun, the moon goes around the earth, and the earth goes around the sun, and that's why the sun comes up over here, as opposed to realizing that every time the sun comes up on our horizon is a gift from God. We have a tendency to rationalize everything and skip over some of the basic tenets of our faith. That can't happen, like the disciples said, because we don't have enough money in our pockets. This can't happen, that kind of forgiveness, because there has to be some sort of makes sense, eye for an eye kind of justice, as opposed to unlimited, boundless grace. It just made me think, what do I miss? What do I miss every day? And so the message for me isn't about diving into the miracles of the story, how in the world were 5,000 people fed, or how in the world would Jesus himself actually walk on water. More, it's about me and how I relate to the world. What do I gloss over? How do I fill in the blanks to fit what I want it to be, as opposed to experiencing the world the way God intended it to be? There's a phrase for the Jewish writing, the Talmud, which says this: we see things the way they are, we see them the way we are. We see the world based on the context that makes us most comfortable. We see the world on the context that makes us most comfortable. If there's any group that's challenging that's close to us now, it's all of those youth in downtown Detroit. Because that's not comfortable, and I'm not talking about the heat. Because our context, for most of us that live in this general area, is a pretty comfortable context, and I prefer to see God in this light, to be honest. We have air conditioning. We can sit in here and still wear a heavy coat and be comfortable. But what we gloss over are the people that are the easiest to gloss over, the situations that are the easiest to gloss over, those things and those people that are still creations of God. But we create our context, or we create our impressions based on our context, on our image and not on God's. So I urge you this week, I guess I should say more, I'm challenging myself this week and into the future that I experience my faith not by what makes me comfortable and not by the blanks that I rationally fill in, but ask myself every single day, what am I missing? Where is God here? What does God want me to do? What numbers or letters am I passing over in order to create something that makes sense to me as opposed to something that God might challenge me to do? That's the challenge. That's my challenge to you. That's, I think, God's challenge to all of us. Pay attention to where God is, not put where we want God to be. Let us pray. Creator God, we thank you for being a God that created all things. We thank you for being a God that doesn't make things obvious or simple. Being a God of beauty and depth and mystery. I ask you this week to give me eyes to see the things I would prefer to gloss over and the courage to pay attention to them. I ask that you grant us as a congregation the same. Not to just act as a group of people who creates a context that's easiest and most comfortable for us, to pay attention to the things that, again, are easiest to gloss over: systems, structures, politics, pain, oppression, injustice. Help us see those things and act accordingly. Help us not to create the world according to us, but experience the world as you want us to build it. In your name we pray. Amen.